Okay, it's just a minute or two after. I know that we're going to have a lot of questions and ideas, so I want to make the most of the hour that we have here. First of all, I will introduce myself. I'm Diane Blazek. I'm the Executive Director for National Garden Bureau. We are sponsoring these webinars all summer. We're very happy to be working with kids gardening. Gail Pabst from my office is on with me. She's waving. I was saying earlier, she has two granddaughters with another grandson on the way, right? So you're going to be really interested in doing this, but you probably have some tips also. Our panelists are all from kidsgardening.org, but otherwise known as Kids Gardening. So they really are the experts on this topic. I can't wait to hear all of their ideas. So let's see here. Let's introduce our panelist. Beth Saunders. Where's Beth? You want to wave? Excellent. Beth is the Director of Marketing and Communications for Kids Gardening, and she does her family gardening in a community garden. Okay, so that's interesting. It means it's not in your backyard, so you have to take a little extra effort to it. And then we have Christine Gall, also from Kids Gardening. She is the Director of Programs K through 12. You do some school gardening as a paid garden educator and a summer program director. That's very interesting. Also another angle. And then we have Sarah Pounders. You do school gardening as a volunteer. Good for you. And you are engaging in plant-focused activities in community green spaces. You might have to explain that one a little bit more. So that is our panel. And maybe what you guys can do is just expand on my introduction a little bit more, maybe a little bit about your history and some fun stories or whatever. So let's hear. I introduced Beth first. So Beth, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here. So I garden in a community garden with my kids. It's just up the street from my house, which is great. So we can get there on our own 2 feet. That's actually one of the ways I try to get my kids to go to the garden is do you want me to pull you in the wagon? Do you want to ride your bike? Like we're sort of making it an adventure to go there. And we've been gardening in that spot for a number of years. But we also have a few ornamental plants at home, and I usually like to let my kids pick out a couple of things that we throw in pots for the deck or whatever. But I'd say that probably one of my favorite things about gardening with my kids is how excited they are about what comes out of our garden that we grow for food. And it's really a great way to convince them to eat what is put in front of them. Well, we grew this in our garden. You watered that. You helped plant that seed. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. I'll give it a try. And we also we pickle and can and put up a lot of the food we grow in our garden, and so I can kind of use that trick all winter long, which is pretty good.
Yeah, that's great. I've heard a lot of people say that is, maybe they had a picky child, but once they got them involved in gardening, then they were all about trying it. So it's a good thing. Christine, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, folks. My name's Christine. As Diane said, I'm program director at Kids Gardening. And most of my experience of gardening with youth comes through my work as an educator. So I've worked on a number of educational farms throughout the Northeast, but most of my kind of work with kids has been through being with school districts and establishing farm to school programs and establishing garden programs and kind of connecting youth to food in a classroom or school garden setting. And I think one of the reasons for me that I love that so much is the school garden, or even like a cooking class where you're using produce from a school garden, it provides this really engaging and unique opportunity for kids to learn. So for so many students, going to school and learning is sitting at a desk in a classroom, but gardening completely expands that. And in many cases, kids don't even like realize that they're learning things when in fact they are. And kind of to echo what Beth said, like there's just so much excitement with that, doing something new, doing something that's hands-on, doing something that they can maybe connect to experiences they've had with their parents or grandparents or other family members at home. And it's just this really, really robust kind of vehicle for learning that engages kids and in different ways and engages different learning modalities, which I think is really important to kind of acknowledge that there are different ways of learning. Some people learn through reading or listening to kind of a teacher talk, but a lot of people might learn through doing. And so a garden is a really fantastic place for that sort of hands-on learning to happen. And that's what gets me really excited about gardening with kids.
Awesome. And Sarah.
Hi, my name's Sarah Saunders, and I wanted to first say, our organization is based in Vermont, and so Christine and Beth are both up in Vermont, but I work from a distance. I am located outside of Houston, Texas, so I have kind of a different perspective from a gardening standpoint and what we're doing different times of the year. I have worked with gardening with kids since I was in college a very long time ago, and I've worked with Extension and also at botanical gardens. And then I've been with kids gardening since 2005 and working with all the different kind of programs we offer and opportunities we offer. And then I also right now, I have two children. One is he is going into 4th grade, and one that is going into 8th grade. So I've kind of been gardening with them since they were big enough to sit in front of the pot and play with the soils they put it in. And then I am the volunteer coordinator at our local school garden. So I also have that experience that I kind of draw from a lot in what we're doing in the classroom. And I think that was it's kind of a wide range of lots of different things that I'll throw in today. So.
That's excellent. And we have the southern gardening, which you've probably been planting things since like December or January. And then you have those of us further north who have to wait a little bit. So that's really good to have a perspective. One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier is we do have some questions that came in before today. So we certainly will go through those. But if anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat box and we will keep an eye on that, and we will be answering questions throughout the whole thing. So let's go. I think what I would like to do is that takeaway or a story from each of you. Like, what have you learned by working with children, either your own or some of the volunteers you're working with or in a classroom setting? What surprised you? What's an endearing story? What's a story we could all learn from if we're taking this home or to our children's schools? I'll let you go in any order you want. You can reverse if you want to. Sarah, you can start first.
Do you want me to start first? Sure, I can start first. So, I really got into gardening with kids because I love to garden and I love plants, and that I want everyone to love gardening and to love plants too. And so I guess that's one of the things that's really left an impression on me is just the magic of watching plants and watching the cycles and watching the garden grow. And even though I've done this so many times, it is new and different every single time, which is fun for the kids. And it is fun for me too, because I'm constantly learning things that I think, oh, there's no way that'll grow. And, then we, keep harvesting cherry tomatoes till I can't possibly eat another one, or things that I'm like, oh, this will grow fine. And then we get a wonderful set of caterpillars to observe and watch as they eat my garden beans that year. So it's just been, it's a fun experience with kids because we are always learning together. And so to me, that's a lot of fun. And I think it's great for them to get to see it as a co-learning experience, so that it's not something that I'm just trying to teach them. I'm trying to work with them to observe and enjoy as much as they are. So I think the constant change is something that always surprises me.
Great. Next, let's hear Christine.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the most maybe not like surprising for me things that I found out about gardening, but one of the things that I've experienced is just how empowering it can be for students. And I think similar to some of my comments in my introduction about, being a kind of a slightly different experience for kids in a school setting where the child who might not succeed in a traditional learning environment or who has a lot of energy, and so their teachers are always telling them, you need to be calm, you need to be quiet, sit down, that like they have a space to shine in a garden. And I distinctly remember I was working for a school district in rural Maine, and I worked with a young boy named Attilio, who was one of those kids who had a lot of energy, who was kind of considered a troublemaker in the classroom. And there was one day that he came out during recess and he came over to our garden and he was like, how can I help? What can I do? And he started harvesting all this food from the garden. And he was like, can we share this with people? Would that be okay if we shared it? And I was like, yeah, sure. And you know what? Those carrots are really big. So I have a knife right here, and I'm going to teach you how to use this knife to chop things up. And then you can go and serve this to your peers. And he did that. And he took it incredibly seriously. And then every single day he would come out and he would do the same thing. He would harvest food, chop up some things, bring it to his peers. And teachers noticed a difference in terms of the way that he engaged with other students, the way that he started to approach the school day. And it was just really incredible to see how a garden was kind of this thing that made him enjoy being at school and kind of empowered him to feel comfortable in that space and excited about being there. And I thought that was like super cool and just really incredible. And it's one of my favorite stories of working in a garden. And I think that that can translate from being in a garden to doing cooking activities in a classroom using garden produce. And that's something that I've done a lot, seeing kids feeling proud of sharing their skills, feeling proud about sharing their food cultures. The school district that I used to work with was incredibly diverse in terms of the student population. And so we would have, kids who were born here in Vermont who had never left the state. And then we had a lot of students who came from refugee and immigrant families from Bhutan and East Africa and Nepal, Serbia. And all those kids had this opportunity to have these really incredible conversations, and the garden kind of acted as the starting point. And it was just neat to see students feel proud of something and to feel excited to share with their peers. And so in that sense, I think that whether it's garden-based learning or kind of cooking-based learning, food-based learning, that is just an incredibly powerful tool to empower students and to have them learn and share in really incredible ways.
Okay, so before we go on, one of the questions that popped up, it just seems so relevant right now for you, Christine. It's, I know that capabilities change with different ages and, other circumstances, but what items have you found that kids at different ages are capable of? Is it trial and error, or is there is there a resource? Do you guys have a resource on your website saying like, okay, pre-K can do this, K through 3 can do this? Do you have some general guidelines or suggestions on that?
So I don't believe we have a resource that
we do have a resource for that.
You do? Oh my gosh, we do. Okay. I was going to say, I know that like many of our lesson plans and our activities kind of have age recommendations and grade recommendations. So that can kind of be a helpful guiding tool. Truthfully, I think like kids are very capable of gardening. And yeah, there are certain different kind of like developmental things that are happening at different ages. If you're working with kindergartners, it can be very hard to plant really, really tiny lettuce seeds because of just the kind of like, fine motor skills that they may or may not have. But planting a super big bean or a super big pea or sunflower seed can be a lot easier. I think everyone can pull weeds. Some of the older kids are a little bit more kind of cognizant and able to like get, okay, I also need to get the entire root out when I'm weeding, as opposed to just like ripping things out of the ground. And, maybe you give, your pre-K or toddler or, kindergarten student a plastic small trowel as opposed to a metal one. So there are just like those little different things that you can think about, but I have seen kindergarteners plant seeds. I have seen them water. I have seen them weed and harvest and eat things right in the garden, just alongside like fifth graders. So I think part of it can be trial and error, knowing the students that you're working with. But it's also fun to kind of like push those boundaries. And I personally think that like as an educator, I am also always learning, right? So I might try something with a group of students and be like, oh, that was a little bit above their age level, but now I know for next time. So that's something that I'm also constantly working with as well.
Great. Beth, do you want to talk a little bit about that resource? And I will interject that you can send me a link after. And when we finish today's webinar, I will send an email out to everybody because I'm pretty sure we're going to have a lot of links and references. So Beth, if you send me the link, you can talk a little bit about it now, but if you send me the link, I'll send it to everybody this afternoon.
Sure. I actually think Sarah wrote the resource, so she might be better. No, you didn't, to talk about it. But it's called Garden by Age, and it just sort of gives a breakdown of, in this sort of age slot, here's maybe what you can expect. Here's some things to try. And just kind of based on their development, what they might be interested in. And, for some kids, that might just be scooping soil from one pot to the next with nothing in it. And that's really fun. Like, maybe I will also interject that as a parent, if your kid is interested in doing something, go for it. Like maybe not with like a knife unsupervised, like Christine has shared a story, but I mean, I would supervise one of my own children one-on-one using a knife. I'd say if your kid is interested in it, give it a go. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
No, I was not the original author, but yes, it goes through each level. It's like kindergarten, preschool, and as they get older, they want more independence and more, more real self-direction in the garden. And so just it's about making sure it's fun and that that it meets them where they are. So, and that also, it's not going to be a really hard. The one thing I wanted to say was that it's not going to be hard, fast to age. So like, although we have it kind of listed by age, really each child is going to be at a different spot. So I think the main message of that article is more about, meeting them where they are.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a follow-up question was, at what ages can they do these things independently? So I'm assuming your reference, the link that we'll send out, will have suggestions, but then of course it's up to each individual. Some may be able to do it independently, some may need some instruction. So it's probably a general guideline with assistance, and then just knowing that as they get older, they can do it independently. That's a question.
Yeah, definitely. So totally.
I was gonna say that, like, I have also worked with middle schoolers and high schoolers, and I've been in situations where oftentimes they need a little bit more supervision than elementary school students. I've worked with fifth graders who do a far better job kind of following directions and then being able to do independent planting than high schoolers. So, it all depends. I think it partially depends on your relationship with the kids that you're working with. But I definitely find that like planting is probably one of the most involved things that at any age can benefit from a little bit of supervision. I mean, and again, to kind of reinforce what I said earlier, I'm also learning every single time I plant. I feel like I always need to kind of think about what I'm doing. So, and I think it's fine to tell kids that this is a learning process, and as you do things, we may or may not succeed, and that's okay, because that's just the way the gardening works and the way nature works.
I wholeheartedly agree. I say that all the time, especially when I'm talking to consumers or new gardeners. It's like, hey, it's like a science experiment. Every year it's different. You have different weather conditions and you decide to grow something different. So have to do it and then keep trying and keep some notes, that kind of thing. Okay, I'm sorry, did we get through everybody with the takeaway or what surprised you? Did I missed you, Beth, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, your turn then.
Okay. So as I said, I garden in a community garden with my kids who are now 6 and 9, but there's, 7 or 8 months from when we leave in the fall till we come back in the spring. And so they've, to a kid, that's a lot of time. And so what I love about gardening with them and what always surprises me is what they're interested in, like the next time we go to the garden, because they've changed so much. Like this year, nobody helped me plant. Oh, actually, that's not true. I had one of my children helped me plant one kale plug. That was it. No, but nobody else was interested in planting. I did all of the planting because they didn't want to. They wanted to go look for tent caterpillars on the apple trees, like in which are like kind of next to our community garden. I was like, cool, pest control, go for it. Which last year we saw we found a tomato hornworm, which they thought was cool, but they really didn't. They were like a little freaked out because they're like so big. And so the fact that this year they're like actively into finding pests, I'm like, okay, well that's different. That's new. And so I feel like just it's a cool way to mark the passage of time of how they've grown. Of like last year they wouldn't stay off the wood chip pile and played like queens of the wood chips all summer long. And this year we're going to do pest control. And I mean, everyone's always into watering because they get to play with the hose. So like will probably be a constant. But yeah, I think it's just really fun to see what they're interested in. And I kind of I'm a little red hen about it. Like I will do it all and you can come in and do what you're interested in. And that's going to be fine. Like I want it to be fun. I don't want it to be, well, we have to go to the garden because you said, because it's time to plant the beans and now it's bean planting time and let's go plant the beans, and people groan and moan about it. Like, why don't we all go to the garden? If you want to plant the beans, that's fine. If you want to go search for tent caterpillars, that's fine.
So remain flexible
Exactly.
and patient.
And plan to do it all.
Yeah,
and when you
yeah.
get help, that's a bonus.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, good advice. So why don't we start with the basics? Like, how do I get started? I mean, maybe you're a new parent. Maybe you have a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or something, and you've just decided, hey, I've never done gardening. Where do I start and what do I do? Who wants to tackle that or part of that?
So I'll chime in. So my first step I usually recommend is for people to start with container gardens, because I think they're very easy. Like anything can be a container. If it has drainage holes and it can hold soil, you can use it. One of the easiest ways that I found to get started is just use 5-gallon buckets. And especially if you're using, use food grade 5-gallon buckets, especially if you're growing edibles. But it's just a really easy way that people aren't intimidated to get started with. So I usually say start small, and also start with something the kids are interested in. So kind of gather that. So I don't know, Christina or Beth, if you have any other ideas for getting started.
I mean, I completely agree with you, Sarah. The idea of starting small, especially if you're gardening with kids in a school setting and you're trying to starting gardening is also starting a school garden. Like starting small is super important to truly understand what goes into all of it and having it be manageable and not having it feel like a chore, having it feel like it's something that's fun and exciting and is a cool kind of like discovery learning experience. So I think that there are also, there are certain plants that are a little bit easier to grow than others. I always like growing radishes with kids as kind of like a starting project because they grow so fast. What is it? Like it's 28-ish days from seed to harvest. So things like radishes can be really, really fun to start with. I would say similarly, beans and peas sprout pretty quickly and they can be really fun to pick, and peas are frequently something that kids like to snack on. So I think, as you're getting started, also thinking a little bit about those plants that you're growing, and thinking, are these things that are easy for us to grow, that fit the containers we're growing, and that we have a use for, right? You don't necessarily, well, it's cool to do gardening as a learning activity. You also want to make sure that you have a plan for the food that you're growing. And maybe that plan is, donating it to a food shelf or donating to a family if like the kids aren't into it. But I think kind of taking that time to really think through the whole process before you jump into it can be helpful as well in terms of creating an enjoyable, manageable experience.
Yeah, I would just say growing things that your kids are interested in growing, even if it's not. One year, my daughter wanted to plant an apple seed from an apple she had eaten, and I was like, don't work. It totally worked. I mean, like, it sprouted. It was cool, and she was totally psyched about it. It was really fun. And I would say another, like, one of my tips for getting started, like if you already have a garden and you want to incorporate your kids in going to the garden or to get them interested in it, is planting things that are available kind of all year or all season long. So something like peas that come up really early, and then they just sort of, keep putting out peas, and they have to kind of search for them, and it takes a little bit of time, and they're excited about looking for it. Or I plant I think it's called ever-bearing strawberries, the kind that, you just get like a couple at a time. That's another fun tip, is something that just has a couple at a time. They have to kind of look for them, and will there be any strawberries? And so yeah, planting things they're interested in, and things that have a longer harvest, a longer time. You can harvest things for a longer time and not just a big haul all at once.
Beth, some of your comments made me think of something, as well as a comment that just popped up in the chat. Someone just shared that their son wanted to plant a Minecraft garden, and they planted beetroot, potato, and pumpkin, which are all things you can grow in Minecraft. And so that idea of like finding things that resonate with your kids or your students that they'll get excited about, like if you need to nudge them in a direction, think of those themes. So whether it's like using Minecraft as kind of like the base for like all the thoughts to kind of come through, or being like, if we want to have a like chips and dip party, let's do a salsa garden, or we can do a pizza garden, or things like that. Having those kind of fun themes can be a way to generate that excitement when you're starting a new garden project with kids as well.
And we have a resource for that with lots of fun theme ideas, so I will include that as well. Although Minecraft wasn't on there, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we have to add that one. We just did one on a Harry Potter garden, which of course, some of the plants in the actual Harry Potter movies are not real plants. So we had to do some interpretations, but hey, what better way to get kids interested and involved would be like, oh, we're going to do a Harry Potter garden and put an owl here and a cat there or whatever else. So yeah, I think theme gardens are great. I like the idea of container gardening. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, either as a parent or as an educator, because I know I was involved in something else with school gardening. And one of the challenges is, well, school lets out in in May or June. So then what? So if we go to all this work to build a raised bed or build a garden, who's going to take care of it? So I was just thinking while you guys were talking, well, hey, if it's a container garden, you can send it home with the child. But do you guys have some solutions or suggestions on, if you have a school garden, what happens when everybody leaves?
Yeah. Here, do you want to go first, Sarah?
Well, I was going to say, yes, that's definitely a challenge. And container gardens kids love to take stuff home. That's for sure. So if there's anything that you can like scoop up and get them to take home, that's great. For our school garden, I know I'm in Texas, so I have a little bit longer growing season during the school year than Christine will share in a minute. Because we pretty much can get almost everything in before the end of the school year. But really looking at your end date too is another thing to keep in mind when you are planting your garden. If you don't want to try and you can, there's also lots of things to extend, like getting parents to sign up and taking turns, or finding like some service groups like Boy Scouts, or maybe a Girl Scout group that wants a service project for the summer. Or, you know, there's lots of different things in that respect as far as getting other people to help maintain it if you want to do that. But in our school garden, and from my experience, we try to find things that'll be ready to harvest before the end of the year, and also to plant also in the fall for things that can harvest in the time we have. And so that limits you a little bit. You know, you can't quite just pick anything to grow. But that way the kids can really see it before they go, and we kind of put the garden to bed before we leave, or at least we try to. This year everything got delayed, but this is, you know, an unusual year. But usually we try to find stuff that'll fit. So, but Christine has a much shorter time frame, so she might have some different tips.
Yeah, for us, the primary growing season is certainly when school is out. There are a couple of different, I think, things that you can do, and they will all depend upon your individual kind of school district scenario that you find yourself in. But we've had, in the district that I previously worked with, we had a lot of success with summer programs and having teachers and students that were engaged either in summer camps that were based at schools or summer school, going out into the garden and helping out there. We had the garden committee of a school talk with all the summer school teachers who they knew were going to be in the building every single day to set up a watering schedule. So that's a really great way to kind of like use what you have right there at your school, if that happens to kind of be available to you. Not all the schools in our district would run summer programming. So it was oftentimes like you had 2 elementary schools that were set because they had teachers there all summer long. And then you might have 2 other elementary schools that had to rely on volunteers. And one of the kind of volunteer systems that has been really effective that I have seen is the idea of creating some sort of shared calendar where people sign up for a single week. So it makes it both manageable in terms of a time commitment, like it's very finite. And I think if you are a volunteer yourself and you happen to have kids, it almost makes it like you have garden summer camp for a week. You can like pitch it like that to your family. So having those kind of 1 week increments can be a really great way to find volunteers who might not be ready to commit to taking care of a garden all summer, but can kind of be there for a single week. And there, depending upon the community that you're in, you know, as Sarah mentioned, there can be certain groups that can be great to reach out to, like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. We have a co-op in downtown Burlington that folks can sign up to do a training. And then when they volunteer in their community, they get like service hours that then apply towards a grocery discount. So if there's kind of any sort of organization in your community that coordinates volunteers, like connecting with them to kind of, because there are a lot of people out there who want to help. It's just kind of finding them and making those connections. So figuring out those ways to like find those avenues to connect with people is important. And for us, one of the ways of doing that is through this co-op relationship and this really cool volunteer program that's been established there.
Great tips. So, okay, I'm going to go on to one of our next questions, pretty specific rather than broad, but I'm sure that your answers could vary for, you know, what age and where on the spectrum. But somebody said, how to set up a simple gardening project for an 8-year-old with autism. So if any of you have some experience and some advice there.
So I can weigh in a little bit on this. So we actually did a webinar. We do some webinars with the National Head Start Association. So the focus is a lot on early childhood, but then we also, this particular webinar was focused on the therapeutic value of gardening for kids. And we had a great guest speaker from the ELS for Autism Foundation and their ELS Center for Excellence, which is located in Florida. And they had put in a very large sensory garden to use with their school there. And so I will definitely give you that link. We'll add that link in there to that webinar, because they talked all about the development of their garden and the different things that they thought of. And it was very specific to children who were on the autism spectrum. I think one of the points that they made is that it's hard to overgeneralize that, because everyone's at a different spot. And so it's hard to say very specifically, like, this would be perfect for you, because you would need to just take into account your child and what their interest is. But some of the things they mentioned were, so they did a sensory garden. So it was really engaging the senses: sight, smell, taste, touch. They made sure to have spaces where the kids could feel like it was their own space and it was kind of a protected location. And they also developed separate spaces that were more social. They did a lot of cool things with water features that were safe but interactive, that they could see. So and then one of the things that they mentioned over and over again is that the garden was stimulating without being overstimulating. And so that was one of the things they really appreciated the center, and why they invested in such a large outdoor classroom for their students, because it provided that perfect balance. So they had a whole outdoor garden. So, and theirs is on a very big scale. So it's, something, but you can take pieces of their suggestions and put it on a smaller scale for your own yard. So sensory gardens were kind of the funnel that they had suggested. So I'll see if Christine or Beth have any other thoughts to throw in there on that.
No, I would just add in, in addition to the webinar, I think we have a written piece on our website about that garden that we could include that link as well.
And we definitely have plenty of resources on just sensory gardens in general, which are just really fun gardens for anyone. Like, sensory gardens are great.
And I will throw in also the American Horticultural Therapy Association. We work with them because National Garden Bureau does some therapeutic garden grants. And you wouldn't believe the number of gardens that are built specifically for children who have autism. And gardening is just a wonderful experience, a wonderful learning experience, wonderful activity. So, that whole topic of therapeutic gardens is a favorite one of mine. So it's really fun to hear what you guys are saying and how it all ties in. So that's really good. And then for a theme garden, I was like, okay, sensory garden could be another type of theme garden. So I added that in. What about keeping the interest of the kids? So somebody puts a watermelon seed in and it sprouts right away, and then they have to wait 3 months, 4 months, to actually get a watermelon. What kind of opportunities are there in between the time from when you plant the seed and you harvest the product, and how do you keep them engaged?
The hose.
Go. Were you going to say the hose, Beth?
The hose. Yeah, I mean, 2 weeks ago, I told my kids we had to go to the garden to water, and my 6-year-old goes, okay, I'll be right back. And she runs upstairs, and she comes downstairs in her bathing suit. And I'm like, sure, why not? So we walked 2 blocks to the garden. She rode her bike to the garden in her bathing suit. And she watered the garden in her bathing suit. And I was like, sure, why not? Yeah, so the hose is really, that's the top tip. And another, as I said before, like planting things that they can kind of nibble on in between from when they plant the watermelon until the watermelon is ready. But what can they eat in the meantime, like peas or strawberries or beans, things that have radishes. Well, I don't know if you want to, well, I guess you could eat a radish right from the ground, but things you have to sort of look for and have a longer harvest time.
Yeah, and I think that there are so many other garden-based activities that can be done that aren't necessarily about like the food that's being produced. So, Beth mentioned earlier, like looking at the tent caterpillars. You can be looking for the insects. You can be investigating your soil for worms. Like digging for worms is a fan favorite. Like every kid loves digging for worms. And I totally echo Beth, like watering is the number one chore that kids want to do. So yeah, like looking at kind of what's going on in your garden ecosystem, other than like plants being there, what animals, what critters, what insects are there. And that can be fun. Someone just asked about different structures in the chat, and designing things like trellises can be a really, really cool STEM-based project. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, can be a really fantastic way, especially in a school setting, to connect the garden to some kind of standards-based learning. But creating things like trellises, or even thinking about, I like to do a lot of investigations in the garden. So one of my absolute favorite activities is doing a color scavenger hunt. So I'll go to something like Lowe's or Home Depot and grab a bunch of just the little paint chips, you know, like the paint swatches that you can get, and get them in a bunch of different colors, chop them up, put them in a hat, and then have kids grab from that hat. They'll pick out a color, and then they need to go find the closest thing they can to that color in the garden. And it can be a really, really great way to have kids kind of slow down and look closely. And then you can lay them all out on a table, and it looks just super cool. All these little paint chips with different colors. And it's amazing, like when the garden is in season, what you can find. Like you can find the most outrageous colors. And that can be just a really fun, like exploratory, somewhat sensory activity to do as well, when, you know, you're just waiting for things to grow.
Yes, my kids also love scavenger hunts. Like we had a summer where we just always had like we either made it, or we have a printout one on our gardening website also that just has like looking for birds and water and, you know, sunshine, like clouds, like all different things. They really had fun with that. And also when I plant, a lot of times I try really hard to plan seeds and transplants, or something that's already started at the same time, especially for the very young children, because they do like to see that immediate impact that you made. So it takes a little more coordination, and sometimes if we can't get our own transplant started, it can be a little more of an expense, but it definitely gets them excited. And I actually made one. This was from we make seed viewers all the time with the kids, because they're so very quick. So this is just a plastic cup, and you take a piece of just craft paper, and you roll it up and you stick it in there. I'm not going to do a very good job. Just stick it in there and have the hole. You stuff in some paper towels, and then this is just like soup bean seeds that you get from the dry. It's not like the fancy kind you get at a garden center for a lot of money. This is like the $1 a bag soup bean seeds from the grocery store. You stick them in there, and this was just done like 2 days ago. So you can, it's pretty warm in Texas, so the temperature can change how fast they grow, but they just keep growing, and you can start them at different times. And then they're eventually going to sprout out, and you're going to get to see the leaves coming up. And so when my kids were really young, we had these growing like all the time. And that was like the fill-in, because there were so many different activities you could do with those beans too, beyond that, just as far as sorting and counting, and then watching them grow. And you can also cook with them, obviously, too. So it was just kind of like a steady, easy, quick, what can I do to keep everyone going kind of activity.
Yeah. And there are so many things you can do with very minimal materials to make kind of exploring in the garden fun. To go back to scavenger hunts, I like to collect egg cartons, and I'll give that as a kid, and that can be like a collection device. And sometimes I might tell them, like, okay, you have to go find all things that are soft, and you need to fill each depression of your egg carton with something that's soft, but you need to go find something that's like hard, and you need to go find something that's biotic versus you need to find something that's abiotic. And then you have kids kind of like searching for all those things, and they have this nice little collection kind of bin for it. Another thing I like to do with really young kids is make binoculars. So you can just take old like toilet paper rolls and then wrap a bunch of masking tape around it, and then you have like binoculars. Toilet paper rolls can sometimes be like a little bit squishy. So if you have the foresight and you happen to be wrapping any presents around the holidays or things like that, save the wrapping paper rolls, because those are a little bit harder. Just chop them into small pieces, slap a bit of masking tape around it, and then you have these really cool little binoculars that they can walk around with. And for really young kids, like preschool students, they absolutely love that. They feel like they're explorers in the jungle or something.
That's a fantastic idea. Sarah, there was a question. Do you ever plant out those seed viewer plants? Do you transplant the sprouted beans?
We have tried that before. They do not transplant very well because usually by the time we get done, the roots are circling and they're all connected with each other. So you'd be surprised how long they'll grow though in just the water before they start like looking really sad. So it's a testament to how many nutrients they already have packed into that seed. But yeah, usually by the time we watch them grow, they're not in any shape to be to be transplanted.
Yeah, another lesson that what all they need to grow, and then maybe if you plant one in soil and one in one of these seed viewer cups at the same time, they can compare that. So that's good.
Absolutely. And you can compost them afterwards, so you can teach about composting.
Another opportunity. That's great. So here's another one, and maybe it's a sensitive lesson, and maybe we just say, "Oh, buck up." But what about handling failure? I mean, I have garden failure all the time. So my niece was telling me that she had used some seeds I gave her, and there were a couple kids, and their seeds just never came up, and they were in tears, in her classroom. So any advice there?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of how you approach it. But I had kids, I always tell the story because it was interesting. They wanted to plant, we had pansies, we were planting pansies. And they're like, well, what happens if you plant it upside down? And I was like, I let them plant it upside down. So like they got to see what happened. And obviously it did not continue to grow because it was upside down. But I think that a lot of that has to do just with how you approach it. And like, I think we've kind of mentioned this a couple of times about keeping it fun and directed, and just having your expectations being that it's a learning process really helps with that. But I totally understand, because every year we do tomatoes with our school garden because tomatoes are in the curriculum. And I'm always like, ooh, what if we don't have any tomatoes to eat at the end? So it does happen.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about, as Sarah said, kind of like how you approach it and how you set up that initial conversation. I think it's important right off the bat to talk about like, okay, we're going to plant, and some of these seeds might come up, some of them might not. And there are all these different things that factor into if we succeed or not. And so you can have that learning conversation. And I think just like establishing that precedent from the beginning is important. And I think it bears some resemblance to like some of the experiences I've had with cooking with students as well, where you have to have that conversation of, okay, we're going to make something and you might try it and you might not like it at all. And kind of establishing, in the case of trying foods, like I would have set language of, this is a thumbs up, I like it flavor. This is a thumbs in the middle, it's so. Or this is a thumbs down, no thank you flavor. And the idea of saying like, no thank you, or it's not for me, as opposed to like, ooh, yuck, gross. We use the saying, don't yuck my yum. And just kind of after, a while, you have that conversation over and over and over with kids, and they get it. They pick up on the idea that like, not everything is going to work out, and that's okay. And we should all be okay with that. And that it's part of like the process of learning. And even if something doesn't work, like we're still learning through that process. But I think if you don't have that conversation in the beginning, that might set you up for a little bit of failure. So have that conversation like right off the bat.
That's a very good tip. Christine, you had said something earlier, and now the don't yuck my yum reminded me of this. You were talking about the diverse population in some of your schools. Do you have any stories about how you were able to expose some kids to some vegetables that they've never heard of before, they've never tried it, and it was, a unification opportunity?
Yeah, so I'll share a quick garden-based story and then a quick cooking-based story. So at the high school that I used to work at, I got to manage a large production garden and was always really excited about making hot peppers, because we had a program over the summer that used a lot of food, and making hot sauce was super fun. And it was always so much fun we'd have this one high school class come in, and just these high school boys would be like, oh, hot peppers, let's eat the hot peppers. And a lot of the Nepali kids who eat a lot of spicy food were like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I'm so happy that we have these hot peppers. And they'd just be eating them. And frequently I'd be like, yeah, sure, take some home if you want, because they wanted to use them in their cooking. And then you would have these other kids trying hot peppers, and like tears would be coming down their face because they were so hot. And it was just, and they'd be like, man, like, you know, Sam, like, how did you eat that hot pepper and not cry? And he's like, well, I eat spicy food a lot. Like when I cook at home, I always use these types of peppers and these peppers, and sharing about all the different kind of pepper varieties that he would use. And so it was cool to kind of see that dialogue going on there at the high school level. And then like with cooking, I would do cooking classes at the elementary school level. And I was usually the one that was bringing the recipes into the class and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. And I had 3 fourth grade girls, all of whom were Nepali, approach me and say, hey, can we do this recipe? Like this recipe for, was it dal bhat? It might have been dal bhat. But they wanted to do this particular recipe from home that was very important. It was a food that they often ate at home, and it was very common kind of to their culture. And I said, I don't know how to do that. So I need you to, like, next week when I come to school, I'll visit your class again. If you can give me a recipe with directions on how to do this, and if you can give me an ingredient list, I will buy all these things. And then the next time I come to your class, you can help me teach this. And they gave me a recipe. They gave me an ingredient list. I went out and I bought everything. And then when I went into class, I kind of introed like, hey, everyone, we're going to be making dal bhat today. And this is something that I've, made once or twice at home before, but like Asmita, she knows how to do this because she cooks this all the time at home. So like Asmita and Kajal are going to come up and they're going to help me teach this class. And they came up, and in front of their peers, they talked about the history of this dish, its cultural importance. They gave a rundown of how to make it, and then like helped me supervise the entire class as we chopped up everything. And everyone loved it. The kids were so excited to try something new. And again, it was just a really, really awesome opportunity to see students be able to step up in a leadership role, to feel students feel comfortable sharing personal information kind of about their lives and about their culture. And especially kind of in the world that we are today, where diversity can be so divisive, it was really, really beautiful to see like these young women step up and teach their class about their culture and their cuisine and their food and their history. And then to have everyone else like be super excited about celebrating that. So I think those are really, really incredible moments. And I would encourage anyone who's in a district that has great cultural diversity and might be doing gardens or cooking classes to consider making sure that all those cultures are represented, whether in garden plantings or in recipes that they're doing, so that the work that you are doing is truly reflective and responsive to like your district's population. Because it's important for kids to see themselves represented, whether that's in the garden or the cooking or just like general curriculum and stuff like that. So if you can make the effort to do that, I think it makes a world of difference.
Awesome. I knew you would have a good story like that. And you hear a lot of that, with different gardens. I go visit breeders' gardens around North America, and it's really fun to see how they're working with different ethnic vegetables because of the increasing interest and everything like that. So that's great. It looks like we're getting down to only like 4 minutes. I would like one of you on the panel to talk about the kids garden community that you just rolled out, because I think there's opportunities for the people on this webinar to use some of the resources in that community. Who wants to take that one over?
I'll talk about it. So we're really excited. We just launched the Kids Garden Community, which is a free online community for anyone who gardens with kids, whether you're a home gardener or an educator or a community volunteer, or the neighbor down the street comes and pokes in your tomato garden. You got a 6-year-old neighbor pokes in your tomato garden. come in and join. It's community.kidsgardening.something.org.
We'll send the link
We'll
out when
send the
we
link,
send it. Yeah.
But it's a place to find resources, to find information about grants, to really connect with other folks who garden with kids. So what our goal for the kids garden community was to kind of take kids gardening, the organization, out of it, and just let the audience that comes to kids gardening connect with one another and really share their best practices, be able to talk with one another, share advice. Hey, does anyone have any good ideas for how to get 27 kindergartners to plant carrots? Like, what's your recipe there? How do you get it done? It's also a great place to share awesome resources that you found. We have some of our favorite resources up there. We've collaborated with lots of other folks in the youth gardening space to really help make this community come to life. So we have support from lots of our peer organizations, and we're just super jazzed about it. It's really exciting. Great conversations happening. So come on in and say hi.
Awesome. Thank you. I see that Andrew has posted a link to that, and I copied it, and I'll send it out in the email. And I have to applaud you. To me, what it sounds like is kind of what the Facebook groups were designed to do, but Facebook groups are not performing the way I think anybody thought they were. So basically, you're taking it into your own hands and providing a much better opportunity where you can kind of control what's happening. And that's a really, really good job. Really.
Yeah. I mean, there's resource library and event calendar, and I mean, it's really robust. We're really excited about different, so there's like a general conversation track, there's a home gardening track, early education. There's all sorts of different forums where you can connect with folks and ask questions. And I'm sure everyone who's on this webinar would be able to answer and participate in those and make connections. So
I would say that probably many of the questions that were like asked of us during this webinar, you could probably post them in the kids gardening community and get quite a few answers from other like peer experts. And when I say experts, I mean both like people who are kind of in youth garden support organizations like us, but also just on the ground educators. Like there are youth gardening experts everywhere. And it's really fun to kind of share everyone's different perspectives and to see those robust conversations happening through the community.
That is excellent. And I just have to say, I think gardeners are some of the most sharing people out there. So it's really good that they have a place to do it. And I know we're all happy to give advice to anybody then when we can. So as we wrap up, I knew this hour would go super fast. I wish I had a bunch of kids that I could go home and garden with, but my daughter's now 26, so she's kind of beyond that. But I thank you guys very, very much. To everybody, all the attendees, you will be getting an email from me yet this afternoon with some of these links we've talked about, plus some. So I thank you. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Get out and garden or teach people to garden. And we really appreciate your time from everybody at Kids Gardening. It's a great partnership that we enjoy. So thank you very much.